I want to stay on the voice for a sec now. You might remember that last weekend opposition leader Peter Dutton revealed that if the voice referendum fails, is voted down, and he won the next federal election, he would call another referendum to recognise Indigenous Australians but exclude a constitutionally protected Indigenous voice. Now, he admitted that in questioning with Andrew Connell on Sky. I found it an odd decision by Peter Dutton. Now, this issue for Peter Dutton, who's clearly trying to appease the powerful yet fairly unpopular moderate faction of the Liberal Party, it seems. His Indigenous Affairs spokesman, Senator Jacinta Price, she's refused to declare her support for his second referendum proposal. Have a listen to her.
There needs to be obviously further discussion as to a second referendum within party rooms and determinations made that brings everyone together in agreement with that. And that
doesn't sound like you support it right at this moment.
Oh, look, I'm all for process, and I'm very much consumed with the fact that we're dealing with this referendum at the moment, and that for me is my priority.
As usual, Jacinta is speaking sense there. I mean, let's just get the referendum we're currently about to vote on out of the way before we worry about whether we need a second one. Joining me now to discuss this and more is Shadow Minister for Fisheries and Forestry, Senator for Tasmania, Jonathon Duniam. Good to see you again, Senator. Welcome. Where do you stand on this idea of a second referendum, and can you explain to me exactly what Peter Dutton's getting at here?
Yeah, sure, Steve. It's great to be with you. And look, Jacinta is right about the fact that there is one fight in town at the moment, and that is the referendum we have before us. And I, like her and like Peter Dutton, are campaigning for people to understand that we don't need division in this country. Unity is better, and so therefore vote no. But I think what Peter Dutton has said around the idea of a second referendum does put paid to the claim by Labor, by the Minister for Indigenous Affairs and the Prime Minister and countless others that this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to recognise Indigenous people in our Constitution. It's like those nasty retailers who say, oh, we've only got 3 or 4 toasters left, rush on down and buy them, pushing people into panic mode to go and buy something they probably don't need. It's this panic-type campaigning they're applying here. But what Peter has done is demonstrated, well, no, hang on, there are going to be other opportunities, including a proposition he's put forward for a second referendum for constitutional recognition, which would be done in a bipartisan way. And this is the way the PM should have done it, in a bipartisan way, rather than his way or the highway.
I agree with the bipartisan argument. I think that's quite silly of the way Anthony Albanese has gone about that. But Peter Dutton, he can't walk away from this, though. So if you do win the next election and this referendum, as it seems right now, Jonathon, will go down, then he has to go through and hold a second one, because that's what he's promised.
And in addition to that, I understand he's also committed to make sure we get it right, that there is bipartisan support across the political spectrum, because you can only go to a referendum when you know it's going to pass. Don't divide the nation like the PM is at the moment. The other thing that can be done too, as I understand it, and has happened in the past, you can have a referendum alongside a general election, not sending the voters out twice, and not having all of the overheads of two elections, so reducing the cost. So there are ways to do this. But, you know, number one, let's deal with the referendum before us and make sure people know what the sensible approach is, and that is to vote no. And then secondly, let's make sure people understand if they do vote no, it's not the end of the world. There are going to be other opportunities to recognise and to reconcile.
On the upcoming referendum, I like to deal with practical matters, Jonathon, and you are the shadow spokesman on fisheries. Do you expect, if the voice does get up, if the Yes campaign is successful, that there will be a push from Indigenous groups around Indigenous fishing rights like there has been in parts of New Zealand?
Oh, look, I think it's inevitable that there will be a push on for expansion of rights and for native title type claims over fisheries rights and quotas across the country. The sad reality is there are many, many good Indigenous folk out there who've participated in great arrangements around resource sharing, and we've got established frameworks out there. We've set them up in the last government. They were world leading in many respects. They didn't need a voice to do that. You had good representatives who were on the ground, knew what needed to be done, worked out an agreement with commercial and recreational fishers, and the rest was pretty easy after that. We didn't need a voice for it then, but you're quite right. I think a voice will, in a sense, embolden those who want to make big claims on something that belongs to the entire country.
I note Chris Bowen, who is pretty much out of control, it seems to me. He's looking into whether to introduce a carbon border adjustment mechanism. Gee, they love long titles for things in government. In other words, it's a carbon tariff on imported goods from countries that don't have a strong net zero policies. Now, that follows the European Union doing that, Senator. But I wonder, what does that mean for Australian businesses and consumers? And importantly, what's it going to do to imported Chinese goods?
Well, it can only mean one thing, Steve, and that is the cost goes up. In a cost of living crisis, that's the one thing a government should be avoiding doing. And we've got to remember, we wouldn't be in this situation if this government hadn't introduced its safeguard mechanism, which prices our manufacturers out of the market. We are being forced to import many more things, and that will continue to be a trend over time because it's too expensive to do things here. So instead, we're going to import more stuff, and if it comes from places like China, as you say, we'll put a tariff on it. It is a spiral to the bottom, and these folks in Labor do not get what we need to do to make it an attractive environment for investment, which also helps with cost of living because inputs and manufacturing are cheaper under the arrangements I'm talking about, not with a ridiculous carbon border adjustment mechanism. We don't need one of those bad policies.
You're a senator for all of Tassie. I wanted to catch up with this issue of that statue in Hobart. This is the statue of former Tassie Premier William Crowther. Now, that's going to be taken down because there's allegations that he stole the skull of a dead Indigenous man and sent it to the Royal College of Surgeons in London. Where is that up to? Is the statue staying or coming down?
Well, the decision-making process has pointed to it coming down, but there's been an appeal lodged, and I support the appeal being lodged. I think this is political correctness and erasing history or rewriting history of the worst kind because, one, the claims around former Premier Crowther are disputed. There are academics out there who are saying the facts that are being put forward here to support this case are not accurate. So, one, that's disputed. Putting that aside, even if all of that were true, the statue was erected in the first place because the man did good things for our state. He was a premier, celebrated by the people who elected him. That's why they put a statue up. But the fact is, we can't just pretend he didn't exist. Let's acknowledge, if these things are true, that something bad did happen. And like the old saying goes, you only repeat the mistakes of the past if you ignore history. So let's not erase this part of history. Let's acknowledge the good and the bad, leave the statue and have some common sense prevail.
Yeah, well said, Senator Duniam. Always a pleasure to catch up with you. Thank you very much for your time. Have a great week.